Welcome to Make Your Money Matter with Brad Barrett, the show that aims to change the way you think about wealth management. Brad is a financial advisor, established radio host, and author of Retire Right. He is a managing director and partner at One Capital Management, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm managing over $4 billion for clients across the nation. Brad and his team are dedicated to helping clients protect and preserve their assets so they can reach their investment and retirement goals. And now, your host of Make Your Money Matter, Brad Barrett.
Welcome into the Make Your Money Matter show. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management. And today on the show, we're going to talk about some questions that your financial advisor should be asking you, specifically 6 questions. And these questions have come up and, from experience really, and I was writing these down and thinking about it, especially with what's gone on in the world over the past, year, 2 years. These are questions that I want each of you to know and to make sure you take some notes today and really use these questions to have a conversation with the advisor you're thinking about reaching out to or with your current advisor. But before we get started, make sure to go to our website at onecapital.com. There you can find out more about myself or any one of our fiduciary advisors. You can also download our podcast through our website, through our media tab. You can also download the podcast on any other platform you would otherwise download a podcast, whether that's Spotify or SoundCloud or the Apple iTunes app on your phone or Google Podcasts. And do me a favor, leave us a review. It helps us get the word out to more. If you like our podcast, share it. Leave us a comment. I really do appreciate each of you listening each week. We're gaining followers, and I'm just so appreciative and grateful. And with that, let's get started. Hey, fun fact. Did you know that our brain is wired to problem solve? And said differently, it's wired to answer questions. And so with that, I think we all understand this and know this. And I was reading something over the weekend that kind of struck me. Did you know, and I think I shared this actually recently in another way, in a roundabout way, but do you know our brain has 60,000 on average, 60,000 thoughts per day? Now, I don't know about you, but that honestly struck me. And I couldn't tell at first if it struck me like that's a lot or that's fewer than I would have thought. But more to the point that I was reading about that was if, let's say that is the fact, that we have around 60,000 thoughts in our heads or questions or things that we're thinking about on average per day. My then question would be, how many of those are we able to answer? How many of those are we able to solve? And ultimately, how many are unanswered? And to me, and I'm no clinical psychiatrist here, but many of you who listen and watch and are for clients out there know I speak heavily about this because we're behavioral beings, we're emotional beings, and that's okay. And when we bring that into our money, it's important to contextualize it. And so these questions I brought up really came from experience, quite fairly. And I think it's important that all of us, and for clients listening right now, you've likely heard me ask these exact questions to you. In our discovery meeting here at One Capital Management, when we first get together, these are the questions you're going to hear me ask. Not in exactly this order, but it'll come out organically in this conversation. For those of you out there who aren't working with an advisor or have never really sat down with their advisor they may have or really don't have a good relationship with their advisor, understand this. These questions should be asked at least out of the gate for sure in your discovery meeting, but also on an ongoing basis, because to effectively help you with your investment strategy, with your retirement strategy, an advisor must get a clear picture of what you have and ultimately what you need, because your goals and objectives will ultimately be vital to the success of whatever your goal is that you have here. And let me share this from experience. In 19 years of being in the financial services industry, coming up on 20 years, and all the clients, all the first meetings, I should say, and all the first meetings I have with clients, look, they really have no idea how to or what to prepare for their first meeting with an advisor. And I want to share something loud and clear before we start this podcast this week, is that is okay. In fact, that is normal. I mean, when you step into a first endeavor with something, you don't know, you're not prepared. You don't know the questions to ask or the things to bring or what to bring up or how the conversation ultimately is to go, which means it's really up to the advisor to get the conversation started, right? And then ultimately steer that conversation in the right direction. And the good advisors, this is what I want to share here before I get into the questions. The good advisors need to steer the conversation into the direction that you are saying you want to go. In other words, in therapy, there's something called a mirroring effect, right? You're able to let out what your thoughts are. Again, back to my example at the top of the show around the fact that we have, like, on average 60,000 thoughts in our head per day. you're able to air some of those out as it relates to your money. And then they're able to mirror back what you're saying in a way that makes some sense to you, because it's ultimately, you don't realize it, but when you say these kind of things, you're ultimately going towards a direction, but you're just not entirely sure what that is. And so framing has a lot to do with this. So a good advisor will help you frame and steer in that direction. And here's the thing I want to share here. Unless your advisor has a complete picture, a holistic picture, as I would say, of your overall current financial situation and really understands, where you're wanting to go with it, it can be difficult to create an effective overall retirement strategy. And real quickly, as I boil this down, let me start off with this. In my experience, the main question that's on everyone's mind, and likely on yours right now, is this. No matter what age you're at right now, but just understand, this is probably a notion you've thought about. Will my money last as long as I do? Now, there's variations of that question, sure, but that's ultimately the question we're all looking to get answered. And if you're hoping for a truly personalized, tailored, customized strategy designed to accomplish exactly that, here are the questions that I feel, from experience, any advisor should be asking in order to help you build your strategy. Number one is this: what do you have? So we're going to start with kind of a what, how, why situation. Their first question is, what do you have? Most people expect to talk about their investments when they meet with a financial professional. That makes sense. And that's important. It's a very important part of the conversation. It's the numerical or the quantitative data. But to help you build a solid strategy, a solid retirement plan, it's critical that you share what you have in and outside of your portfolio. Things like your real estate, maybe family holdings, things like that. I mean, for example, also things like debt, right? If any, or you're carrying and what you expect to pay and the interest rates. I mean, there's a lot of questions that come around this that doesn't have to do specifically with your retirement plan or anything like that. There's also cash, like emergency funds, what income streams you or your spouse may have, whether it's Social Security and pensions. Like all this comes in to play. Not just, my first question of what do you have currently, it's also looking down the road. And number two, the second question is why? Why do you have it? So often, people who are, let's say this is more for those who are nearing retirement, have what I call a junk drawer. You've heard me say this before. We all have that junk drawer in our house where, there's a lot of things in there and it accumulates over time. I know Veronica and I have this one drawer and we always talk about oh man, babe, one day we're going to clean that out. But here's the thing. There's a lot of important things in this drawer. I mean, and again, none of these things go together necessarily as something comprehensive, but they are important. Now, that's okay to have pens and rulers and, tape measures, scissors, whatever else, keys. I mean, random things that'll be in this drawer in your house, but we want to be careful not to do that with our investments and our retirement, right? And here's what I mean by that. Maybe somebody told you to buy an annuity or some long-term care policy years ago. Or maybe they advise you to do some certain stock or bond mix, but they're not entirely sure why. If an investment currently for you doesn't have a purpose, or you're curious if it still has a purpose, it may be time to switch it for something that does, or just re-up your plan and ask this question, and your advisor periodically should be asking this. So that's number two. Why do you have what you currently have? Number three is this: how will you use it? Now, let's go back a second. When you first started investing, what was your objective? Your objective was to grow your money, accumulating as much as you could to get your long-term goals. That's the goal of any investor. If you think investment, the first thing you think of is, getting gains and growth. And don't get me wrong, super important. Now, as a retirement planner, understand this. In retirement, that focus typically transitions over time. It transitions from an accumulation to a distribution, ultimately finding strategies that can provide the income you'll need to replace your paycheck. For many out there listening, it's a pension, right? For your retirement plan in general, this can also be a distribution rate. We'll talk about that later. And then you also ultimately get into another conversation of preservation, looking at ways to ultimately lower risk in your portfolio and finding that happy marriage between growth and preserving. Again, investing with a purpose here, as always, is key. And there are seasons of our life that we go through. There are definitely adages and rules of thumb. We all know the one where it's like you should get more conservative as you get older. And again, that's born out of empirical data based on what I'm sharing here of, investing with a purpose at the stage in your life. That being said, you have to make sure you look at your plan and making sure that that actually works for you. Ultimately, you want your money to work for you, not you working for it. Said differently, and I say this often, money is a great employee, but a terrible boss. And we live typically in this accumulation phase of our life because a lot is happening in this phase, right? We're growing our wealth, we're finding our career, we're meeting that special person, we're growing a family, we're paying and buying a house and paying a house off, we're putting kids through school. I mean, so much is happening in this phase. But you want to make sure that during that phase, you don't miss the planning aspect for the next phase.
Stay connected. Get frequent updates on the show. Follow Brad Barrett and Make Your Money Matter on most social media platforms. And catch full episodes of Make Your Money Matter streaming now on our YouTube channel. To schedule your no-obligation appointment, go to onecapital.com or call 805-410-5454.
All right, question number 4 that I was thinking about is this. When will you need it? When will you start using it? Said differently. I mean, if you're like most retirees, you'll have more than one income source in retirement. It might be a pension, it might be distributions from a retirement plan, maybe it's some rental income, maybe it's Social Security if you had your 40 quarters on before working, a certain job, for example. And the sequence in which you turn on these streams of income can actually affect your bottom line in several ways. It can affect it from the amount of money you'll receive over a lifetime, all the way down to, the taxes you'll pay every year. So the fourth question I think every advisor, and you should be asking yourself is, when will you start to need it? When will you start using it? Number 5 is this, and this gets into the last 2 get into more of, the strategy, I would say, from an advisor's perspective. And the 5th one I thought about was this: how much exactly, and comes to a distribution rate, are you going to need each year from your investments, from your savings? Now, many people will think that a planner wants to go through a budget with you. And don't get me wrong, cash flow is one of the main ingredients to understanding how to build a very well thought out, comprehensive financial plan. But I want to share something with you, and this is going to sound shocking for a second, and many of my clients listening have probably likely heard me say this, that budgeting is for fools. Let me restate that for a second. Budgeting is for fools. Here's what I mean by that. I don't want you budgeting at 9 a.m. and then accounting for your lunch cost at 12 p.m. The reality is this: the variableness of a budget is so hard to pinpoint, and it changes all the time. And I know you listening right now know that this is true, because when's the last time you ran a budget for a full year and it was exactly to the cent the number you projected? It's not going to happen. It's so not going to happen. I mean, life is variable. Now, what I want to share though is that I want to change the word of budgeting to patterns. What we're looking for is patterns of outflow. Some consistent patterns are our fixed outflows, right? Our utilities, well, that's a little bit variable. Our mortgage tends to be fixed, right? So these are patterns that we can kind of see month in and month out, year in and year out. Then you get into the patterns of the variableness. So 1 month or 1 year, it might be, dogs need to go to the vet and tires need to be changed. But the next year, it might be a trip. So we can't just label it one category and then expect that category to prove itself out every year. So understanding and accounting for variableness is how we understand pattern flows. And that is very different than budgeting, because budgeting gets into the minutia, the granular detail. And what we really want to do is look at the macro side of it and more the higher level of the flows over time. And, look, again, budgeting in general is tough every year, but it is important. And finding your patterns is really important, because you need to have a rough idea of what you expect to need or want, 2 4-letter words I talk about a lot, in retirement. And keep in mind that your income and spending are likely to change as you age as well. Something I share often, for those of my clients listening right now who are retired, you've likely heard me say this, that, between, let's say, 60 and 70, you're likely, patterns notwithstanding, are going to spend more than you will maybe from 70 to 80. Now you might be thinking, hey, Brad, that's a subjective statement. And I would agree. Here's why. Because we might spend the same, less or more between 80 and 90 that we do between 70 and 80 or 60 and 70 or whatever age range, but it might be different. A great example is from 60 to 70, you might be traveling the world, still doing your thing, and between 70 and 80 and 80 and 90, your body's slowing down a little bit and you don't want to, and maybe you're spending it more on healthcare. I say this a lot, and I think it's important to reiterate, that wherever you are right now in your life, understand this, that the majority of my career, I've seen a lot of this, that we tend to, in our youth, and you can define youth for yourself, we tend to spend our youth sacrificing our health for our wealth. And then ultimately, as we get older and we age and we're in retirement, we end up doing the opposite. We sacrifice our wealth for our health. And so a large part of my weekly podcast and a large part of our practice here around the behavioral psyche as it relates to money is to make sure we have a happy marriage between the two during the season that we're in. And so the fifth question I think is really important to ultimately your advisor to ask you and build a plan for you is how much you're going to be needing from your savings and your investments. And the sixth one is this one. I threw this one in there at the end that I thought was really interesting from an article I was reading as well, that, what are some of the things, that are missing that you still need to address? I'll share this very openly that I think most of the times I have a new client reach out to me I hear this a lot is that, I've been wanting to do this and I just didn't really want to look at the numbers. I was kind of scared of the numbers. I didn't want to focus on some of my bad decisions as it relates to debt or spending or things like that. And I understand that. But it's really important. The first step to any successful anything in life is taking action, okay? And I also talk about this a lot. There's two words that goes on in our minds often, and that's worry and concern. And believe it or not, they're very different words. They mean very different things. Worry tends to have your brain and your mind and your emotions focus on things that you can't control. Concern, those same things come up, but it's typically an actionable item. A concern means you actually have some concern and you want to do something about it because you can. And I think being concerned about your future self as it relates to your finances, or being concerned about your investments right now and if you're doing the right thing or your spending or your debt or whatever it might be, leads you to action. And I think it's really important that you ask yourself, what are some things that still need to be addressed? For many listening right now, it might be the entirety of the plan. Maybe you haven't reached out to an advisor, or some of these questions I'm asking today, you haven't really asked yourself and you haven't addressed them. And it might be making you feel a little bit nervous. That's not my goal or my intention for today. But it is important for you to be able to, ask yourself earnestly and honestly, is that really something you want to focus on? Is it causing you more stress and anxiety to not focus on it than it would be to find a professional that you can trust and like, and meet a few? I'm not saying just, hire one and go with it, but it's really important to make sure you find that counsel to help you with these, all right? Because they can find the right strategies. We here at One Capital, that's our job, is to find the right strategies for you, not for your neighbor or your colleague or anybody else, but for you. Because the right strategies will help you deal with all of these and other risks that you may face. Now, of those 6 questions I wanted to bring up today, look, your advisor may not address all of these topics in depth at your first meeting because it is a lot, but you should expect to discuss them as you build your strategy over time. And of course, you should always feel free to come into and discuss with that person with questions of your own. These are 5 or 6 that I want to come up with that I've seen that I think are really important. And they're more higher level questions because obviously you can take these for yourself, maybe write them down, take some notes, and then ask like some sub questions that more relate to you and your spouse and your family structure, and use that to speak with your advisor, whether it's finding that advisor for the first time or if it's an advisor you've worked with, to re-ask these questions. And I'd also ask why are these questions not being asked? Because it's important. And for those of you out there who aren't working with an advisor and you want to, reach out to someone, if you're listening here, you can reach out to us. We're happy to help. Our discovery meeting is complimentary. It's for you. We want to, meet with you to make sure that we can provide value to you, and we both define value the same way. It's important. And I want to thank you for listening to the Make Your Money Matter show this week. As always, remember, speak with a financial advisor near you about your specific situation before acting on anything discussed today. And again, if you'd like our help, you can reach us at 805-410-5454 or on our website at onecapital.com. And until next week, always remember to make your money matter.
The information in this show is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration a listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.